There's a reason people stop taking you seriously, and it's not because you're not smart. It's because of the things you say without thinking, words that slip out like reflexes, but slowly tear down your credibility, your confidence, your power. Have you ever noticed how certain phrases burn bridges before you even realize they're on fire? Ever wondered why people listen more to those who speak less, but speak better? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You might be sabotaging yourself every single day with words that feel normal, but signal weakness, fear, or a closed mind. The Stoics warned us, better to trip with the feet than with the tongue. Your speech reveals your thinking, and your thinking shapes your life. In this video, we're going to uncover the phrases that silently scream, "I'm not who I pretend to be," and replace them with the mindset of those who actually earn respect. Because if you don't control your words will control your fate. If you're ready to speak with clarity, lead with strength, and live by higher values, not just talk about them, please subscribe. Let it be a quiet decision to hold yourself to a higher standard. A small act of discipline. A step toward becoming the kind of person whose words reflect wisdom, not impulse. 1. I already know that. There's something subtle and surprisingly dangerous about familiarity. We hear a lesson we've heard before, a principle, a reminder, a piece of advice. And instead of taking a moment to reflect or reconsider it, our minds shut the door with 4 quick words. I already know that. It feels innocent, maybe even smart, like you're proving that you're not new to this. But what it actually reveals is something deeper and far less flattering. It's not a sign of mastery. It's a signal that your mind has stopped being a student. The truth is, most people don't learn something the first time they hear it. They might understand it, they might even be able to repeat it, but embodying it, living it out, that takes revisiting the same truth again and again, from different angles, with fresh eyes. The Stoics knew this intimately. Marcus Aurelius journaled not to teach others, but to remind himself. Again and again, he returned to the same concepts. You must build up your life action by action, he wrote, and be content if each one achieves its goal as far as possible, and no one can keep you from this. That's not a man who thought he already knew everything. That's someone who understood that wisdom isn't a destination, it's a practice. When someone says, I already know that, what they're really saying is, I've decided there's nothing more for me to gain here. And that's a dangerous mindset, because the moment you think there's nothing left to learn, your growth stalls. The most intelligent people I've ever met, the ones with depth, clarity, presence, they're not the ones shouting their knowledge. They're the ones asking quiet questions. They nod more than they interrupt. They're still students. They're still listening, because they understand that truth often shows up wrapped in repetition. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." That includes what you say to yourself. When you brush off an idea because you've heard it before, you're not just avoiding information, you're avoiding transformation. And that transformation doesn't happen in the first hearing. It happens the 5th time, the 10th, the 100th, but only if your mind stays open long enough to let it in. Think back to the last time someone tried to offer you advice. Maybe a mentor, maybe a parent, maybe someone you didn't even respect that much. And you cut them off, mentally or verbally, with, yeah, I know. How much did you really know? Did you know it deeply enough to live it when things got hard? Or did you just know it in theory, the way we all know we should sleep more and drink water, but still don't do it consistently? Intellectual awareness isn't the same as lived understanding. Epictetus taught that philosophy is not just something to talk about, it's something to train in, like you would train for a sport or war. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it, he said. That means you don't graduate from the fundamentals, You don't outgrow the basics. You return to them again and again, because real mastery means owning the simplest things at the deepest level. I once watched a senior software engineer sit quietly while a junior team member explained a feature he had probably built 100 times. The younger guy was nervous, over-explaining, and halfway through, he paused and said, "You probably already know this." The senior engineer smiled and said, "Maybe, but I want to hear how you see it." That's the kind of humility that makes someone great, not pretending to know everything, but staying open to seeing something familiar in a new light. And here's where psychology backs it up. Our brains are wired to seek efficiency. When we hear something familiar, the brain often skips over it automatically. That's how habits work. But personal growth doesn't come from automation. It comes from attention, from being willing to look closer. Neuroscience calls this cognitive closure, the urge to resolve ambiguity and move on. But that urge, if left unchecked, kills curiosity. And when curiosity dies, so does creativity, resilience, and emotional growth. There's a reason teachers, coaches, and philosophers repeat themselves. It's not because they think you're slow, it's because they know that depth doesn't come from novelty, it comes from consistency, from revisiting the same principle under different pressure, from hearing "be patient" at 20 when it means one thing, and hearing it again at 40 when it means something completely different. We don't live in the same mental world every day. Your perspective shifts, your experiences deepen. You're not the same person you were a year ago or even a month ago. So when you hear a lesson again, you're hearing it with new ears. The soil is different, and maybe this time the seed finally lands. Seneca put it bluntly, "While we teach, we learn." But the inverse is also true. While we refuse to learn, we stop teaching anything of value. That's why the truly wise never shut down a conversation with, "I already know that." They ask, "How does this apply to me now?" Or, "What's the part I've overlooked?" That single shift in posture, from assumption to attention, is what separates the ego from wisdom. And let's talk ego for a second, because that's really what "I already know that" is about. It's not about knowledge, it's about wanting to appear knowledgeable, wanting to protect your image. We use that phrase like a shield, so we don't have to feel uncomfortable, challenged, or exposed. But here's the paradox. Trying to look smart often makes us miss the very thing that would actually make us smarter. Think of someone you admire, someone whose presence carries weight. Maybe it's someone close to you, maybe it's a public figure. I'd bet that what you respect most about them isn't their ability to dominate conversations, but their ability to listen, to learn, to stay grounded. Intelligence isn't just in what we say, it's in what we choose not to say. The restraint, the humility, the willingness to revisit something simple and dig deeper into it over time until it becomes part of who we are. And that's the challenge I want to offer you. The next time you feel that urge to shut down a conversation with, "I already know that," pause. Ask yourself instead, what angle am I missing? Or, what would I hear if I listened like it was the first time? You don't need to prove anything. The people worth listening to aren't impressed by how much you know. They're drawn to how open you are to knowing more. This mindset shift doesn't just help you grow, it changes your relationships. When you stop trying to always be the expert, you create space for deeper conversations. You invite insight. You show respect. And over time, that makes you someone others respect more because you're clearly still growing. Remember, wisdom isn't loud. It's quiet. It's not in showing off what you've learned. It's in staying humble enough to learn more. As Socrates famously said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." Now that's a phrase worth repeating. not to sound smart, but to stay wise. 2. That's impossible. We all have moments where something ahead of us feels too big, a goal we can't picture, a change that looks too steep, a challenge that seems too heavy. And in that space, when our mind hits resistance, it becomes easy to default to one simple phrase: that's impossible. At first, it sounds practical, even responsible. You might convince yourself you're just being realistic or saving time by not chasing something that can't be done. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll often find that what you're really saying isn't that the thing can't be done. You're saying you're afraid you can't do it. And that's a whole different truth. The Stoics were extremely familiar with this kind of internal tension. They taught that most of our suffering comes not from the events themselves, but from how we interpret them. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Saying something is impossible is a reaction, not a fact. It's a defense mechanism the mind uses to avoid pain, embarrassment, or failure. It's easier to write something off than to admit we're intimidated by it. It's easier to say the mountain can't be climbed than to accept that it might require more effort than we're comfortable with. But here's the thing: intelligent, disciplined minds don't panic when they feel discomfort. They get curious. They lean into it. When something feels overwhelming, they don't immediately ask, "Can this be done?" Instead, they ask, "What part of this can I do right now?" Because most things labeled impossible are actually just unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things always feel heavier than they are. Think about the last time you faced something new, something that made you feel out of your depth. Maybe it was a new job, a difficult conversation, a massive project. At first, your brain probably panicked and tried to convince you it couldn't be done. But what happened once you got started? Once you took that first shaky step? Chances are the task didn't magically become easy, but you became more capable. Because momentum does something that motivation can't. It builds confidence through movement. The Stoics would call this training the will. They believed that virtue and strength were developed through action, not intention. And here's where a weak mind falters. It waits to feel ready. It waits to feel certain. It waits until all the pieces are clear before moving. But a strong mind understands that most of life doesn't come with a perfect plan. A strong mind says, "I'll begin now with what I've got." Seneca wrote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult." That's the kind of wisdom that changes your entire approach to adversity. Let's get brutally honest for a second. The phrase "that's impossible" has more to do with fear than fact. It often means, "I don't want to try and fail," or "I'm afraid of being seen trying and not getting it right." But that fear wears a mask, and the mask looks like logic. It looks like playing it safe. But it's not logic, it's limitation. And we live in a culture that's trained us to believe that safety is the goal, that staying in your comfort zone means you're being wise. But the Stoics weren't interested in comfort. They were interested in freedom. And freedom comes from confronting your own limitations, not obeying them. When you hear yourself say, "That's impossible," you're often standing right at the doorway of your own growth. The mind throws that phrase out as a last-ditch attempt to protect you from discomfort. But on the other side of that discomfort is where everything worth having lives: progress, confidence, peace. You don't get those things by avoiding challenges. You get them by outgrowing the fear that labels those challenges as impossible. Psychologically, this is tied to what's known as learned helplessness. It's when a person believes they have no control, so they stop trying. They become passive. They surrender before even making a move. But intelligent people challenge that reflex. They remember that control isn't about fixing the entire situation. It's about taking ownership of something, even one small action. That shift alone rewires your sense of agency. Here's something worth sitting with. Most of the time, when we declare something impossible, we're actually just overwhelmed by the whole picture. We see the 10 steps ahead and panic. But you don't need to solve the entire puzzle today. You just need to find the next piece. The mind can handle one step. It's the idea of the full journey that shuts people down. But the Stoic mind understands this and practices breaking things into pieces. They do what Marcus Aurelius advised. Don't let your imagination be crushed by life as a whole. Instead, stick with the situation at hand. Let's use a real-world example. Think about someone who wants to change their career path. Maybe they've worked in one industry for a decade and want to try something totally different. To them, that leap feels impossible. They don't know where to start. They worry they're too late, too inexperienced. So they label the whole idea impossible and stay where they are. But a stronger mind would say, okay, what's one small action I can take this week? Maybe it's reading a book on the new field. Maybe it's reaching out to someone for a conversation. Maybe it's taking an online course. These aren't glamorous moves, but they're real, and they create motion. And motion dissolves fear. If you start treating the word impossible as a red flag, an internal signal that fear is trying to speak for you, you'll start catching yourself. You'll notice how often that word comes up when you're scared to stretch. And over time, you'll build a new pattern. One that doesn't shut down when things feel big. One that leans in and asks, what's possible right now? Because almost everything becomes possible when you break it down into manageable parts. Strong minds rewrite their narrative. They don't wait for someone to tell them what's possible. They decide for themselves, based on effort, not fear. They don't rely on proof before they move. They become the proof by moving. That's the Stoic way. Grounded, focused, resilient. Not flashy, not motivational hype. Just steady, quiet strength. So here's your challenge. The next time something feels impossible, don't say it. Don't label it. Break it down. Shrink the picture. Ask yourself, what's one thing I can do today to move a half step forward? Not because you know it'll work, but because doing something is always better than doing nothing. That's how strong minds win, not in giant leaps, but in quiet, consistent effort that adds up when nobody's watching. And if you can build that habit of catching yourself in the impossible moment and replacing it with a question instead of a statement, you will start to experience life completely differently. You'll face challenges with clarity, not chaos. You'll meet uncertainty with presence, not panic. And more than anything else, you'll stop being someone who gives fear the final say. 3. That's not my fault. There's a strange comfort in pointing the finger. When something goes wrong, whether it's at work, in a relationship, or even in the privacy of your own thoughts, blaming someone or something else gives instant relief. It tells your ego, you're safe. You didn't mess up. This isn't your fault. And on the surface, that sounds fine. It feels like you're protecting yourself. But here's the hidden cost. Every time you push away responsibility, you give away your power. You surrender your ability to change the outcome. And slowly, almost without noticing, you train yourself to stay stuck. The Stoics would have seen this for exactly what it is, a trap. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that we don't control everything, but we do control how we respond. You have power over your mind, he wrote, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That means the wise don't waste time asking, whose fault is this? They ask, what can I do about it? They shift their focus away from fault and toward function. because finger-pointing never fixed a problem and blame never made anyone wiser. But this isn't about taking on guilt or beating yourself up. That's a misunderstanding. What we're talking about is ownership, responsibility. The mindset that says, even if I didn't cause this, I still have a role to play in how it ends. That's not just wisdom, that's freedom. Because the moment you accept even a small part of the problem, you regain the power to be part of the solution. Think about this. How often have you heard someone say, "That wasn't my fault," in a moment of stress or pressure? It's like a shield. But the shield blocks more than blame. It blocks growth. It stops them from reflecting, from adapting, from learning. In real life, the "not my fault" mindset shows up everywhere. The employee who misses a deadline and blames their manager's poor instructions. The partner who lashes out and blames the other for pushing their buttons. The person who never starts their dream project because they didn't get the right support growing up. And listen, there may be truth in all of those excuses. Maybe the instructions were unclear. Maybe someone did provoke you. Maybe you didn't get support. But the deeper truth is this: none of those things are within your control anymore, and clinging to them only delays your growth. That's why intelligent, grounded people don't spend much time defending their position. They spend time improving it. They ask the hard questions. Could I have communicated better? Did I react from emotion instead of clarity? What would the highest version of me have done differently? Questions like these don't feel as comfortable as blaming others, but they build something in you. They make you more capable, more aware, and over time, more respected. In Stoicism, this kind of self-examination was part of daily life. At night, philosophers like Seneca would review the day and ask themselves where they had acted poorly, not to feel shame, but to sharpen their awareness. What did I do wrong? He would ask. What duty did I neglect? What habit did I allow to slip? This wasn't self-criticism, it was self-leadership. He wasn't interested in who else messed up, only in how he could improve. And that's a powerful standard to live by, because once you accept that you have agency, even in difficult situations, you stop waiting for other people to fix things. You stop expecting perfect conditions. You begin working with what's in front of you, and that habit creates momentum. It makes you reliable. It earns the respect of those around you, not because you never make mistakes, but because you own them. Now here's where psychology backs all this up. There's a concept called locus of control. People with an external locus believe life happens to them, that others are responsible for their outcomes, that they're victims of circumstances. People with an internal locus believe the opposite. They still see challenges, but they also see choice. They believe that how they show up, what they think, and how they act matters. And the research is clear. People with a strong internal locus of control are more successful, more resilient, and mentally healthier overall. But it starts with language. It starts with noticing the words we reach for in difficult moments, because "that's not my fault" might feel like it's protecting you, but really, it's closing you off from something better. It's protecting your pride, not your potential. And if you're always protecting pride, you'll stay fragile, because pride hates accountability, but wisdom demands it. That's why the most capable people I know are often the first to say, "That one's on me." Not because they're weak, not because they're eager to take the fall, but because they understand that ownership isn't the same as fault. It's the doorway to growth. They're not defending their ego, they're developing their skill. And that subtle shift is everything. You see it in great leaders. When something breaks, they don't duck. They step in, they speak up, they say, "We didn't get the outcome we wanted, and here's where I could have done better." That kind of presence earns trust, and not just from others, but from yourself. Because when you practice accountability, you build internal integrity. You know, deep down, that you're the kind of person who faces what's hard. That quiet confidence. It's not about charisma or status. It's about self-respect. Now let me be clear, this doesn't mean taking responsibility for other people's behavior. Stoicism isn't about being a doormat. You're not responsible for what others say, do, or feel, but you are responsible for how you respond, for how you communicate, for the tone you set. That's the part that matters. That's the part you control. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control. It's one of the most fundamental teachings. Focus on what's within your power and let go of what isn't. Blame focuses outward. Ownership focuses inward. And that's where your leverage is. That's where all your strength lives. So here's the challenge. Next time you feel the urge to say, "That's not my fault," catch yourself. Take a breath. Ask instead, what part of this is mine to improve? Maybe it's your tone, your timing, your preparation, your patience. Find your peace. Own it. Not because you're guilty, but because you're capable. Carl Jung once wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." That's what this is really about. Seeing your part clearly, owning it fully. And by doing that, gaining the clarity to lead, not just yourself, but the people around you. Because the world doesn't need more people defending their innocence. It needs more people accepting responsibility, stepping up, leaning in, not to be blamed, but to build, not to carry the weight alone, but to lift it first. And the more you practice this mindset, the more grounded you become, the less reactive, the more in control, because you're no longer waiting for someone else to fix it. You're no longer stuck in the game of who's right. You're playing a deeper game now, the one where your growth matters more than your pride, the one where your evolution matters more than your image. That's not weakness, that's real strength. And in a world obsessed with excuses, it's one of the rarest things to find. So be the person who says, "I could have handled that better." Be the person who fixes things without needing applause. Be the person who owns their peace, even when it's uncomfortable. 4. I don't need help. There's this idea many of us grew up with, the belief that strength means standing alone, that the truly capable person is the one who never complains, never cracks, never needs a hand. We wear independence like armor, convincing ourselves that asking for help is a sign of weakness, that needing support makes us look less competent. So we push forward, heads down, shoulders tight, dragging the weight of everything we're dealing with, silently. And if anyone offers to help, we smile and say, "I'm good." But underneath that smile is someone who's stretched thin, and under that thinness, pride. A quiet voice whispering, "You should be able to handle this." But modern culture has twisted things. Somewhere along the way, we started confusing self-reliance with isolation. We began romanticizing the lone wolf, the solo hero who battles the world with no support. And sure, that sounds tough, but it's not how humans are built. We're wired for connection, for feedback, for shared burdens. Our ancestors didn't survive alone. They thrived in tribes. They supported one another, relied on one another, grew with one another. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But you can't transform when you're too proud to reach out. The truth is, refusing help doesn't make you look strong. It makes you stuck. It slows down your progress, limits your perspective, and traps you in your own blind spots. You might be working twice as hard just to stay in the same place because you're trying to prove something. But here's a better question. To who? Who are you trying to impress by carrying everything alone? Who do you think will give you a gold medal for suffering in silence? And that's the heartbreaking part. A lot of people don't ask for help because they think they have to earn it. They think they have to struggle long enough before they're allowed to reach out. But help doesn't need to be earned. It just needs to be accepted. That doesn't mean leaning on people for every decision or using others as crutches. It means recognizing that wisdom includes knowing when to bring someone in, not because you're weak, but because you care about the outcome. When you're stuck in your own head, your view of the problem becomes narrow. Your thoughts start looping. Everything feels heavier than it really is. That's the kind of pressure that leads to burnout, bitterness, even breakdown. But the moment you speak it out loud, when you invite someone in, the weight shifts. Solutions appear. Often, not because the person has all the answers, but because just talking about it lets you see it from a different angle. Epictetus said, "It is impossible to begin to learn that which one thinks one already knows." That applies to asking for help too. If you think you're supposed to know it all, you'll never allow yourself to ask. You'll stay stuck in the illusion that admitting uncertainty is some kind of personal failure, but it's not. Admitting uncertainty is the first step toward real clarity. And it's not just about practical problems. Sometimes what we need help with isn't visible. It's emotional. It's mental. It's about asking a friend for perspective when your mind is spinning. It's opening up to someone when you're not okay, even if you don't know what to say. That kind of vulnerability can feel terrifying, but it's also one of the most courageous things you can do. Because courage, as the Stoics saw it, wasn't about charging into battle. It was about standing firm in the truth, especially when that truth makes you uncomfortable. Let me put it another way. You wouldn't judge someone for asking directions in a place they've never been. So why judge yourself for needing guidance in a difficult season of life? Why beat yourself up for asking a mentor to look over something? Why feel shame for leaning on someone you trust when your energy's low? That's not weakness. That's wisdom. It's strategic. It's how you grow. And you might not even realize how much people around you want to help. We assume that asking will be a burden, that we'll seem needy or incompetent. But most of the time, when you ask someone for help, especially someone who cares, they feel honored. They feel useful. You give them an opportunity to serve, to support, to feel connected. As Seneca said, "No one can live happily who has regard only for themselves and turns everything to their own purposes. You must live for your neighbor if you would live for yourself." Still, asking for help doesn't always come naturally. For some, it goes against years of conditioning. Maybe you were raised to believe that you shouldn't show weakness, that strength meant silence, that being vulnerable meant being fragile. But real strength isn't about what you hide. It's about what you're willing to face, including your limits, including your pride. And when you start asking for help in small, intentional ways, something shifts inside you. You stop seeing others as threats or judges. You start seeing them as allies. You develop trust, not just in them, but in yourself. Because asking for help isn't just about them showing up. It's about you making the decision to stop pretending you have it all together. That's a brave move. That's a disciplined move. Think of the leaders you admire most, the ones who've built things that last, the ones who stay steady under pressure. They didn't do it alone. They had teams, advisors, coaches, support systems. What made them powerful wasn't their ability to handle everything. It was their wisdom to delegate, to listen, to lean on others when needed. That's what intelligent people do. They don't carry every burden alone. They share it. They open the door and say, "I could use your insight here." And in doing that, they get stronger, not weaker. So here's a thought worth holding on to. You're not failing when you ask for help. You're maturing. You're developing the emotional intelligence and mental resilience that says, "I care more about progress than appearances." And that's rare. That's valuable. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." That hits hard, because it's not the lack of people, it's the lack of openness that isolates us. You can be surrounded and still feel alone if you never let anyone see what's real. So maybe this is your moment to stop doing it all on your own. Maybe this is the sign you didn't know you needed. If there's one thing you've been carrying alone lately, one decision you've been overthinking, one task that's been sitting on your shoulders like a weight, this is your challenge. This week, ask for help with it. Just one thing. Doesn't matter how small. Make it a habit. Make it a principle. Watch how things start to move. Watch how your energy shifts. Watch how the world opens up a little more when you stop trying to prove something and start trying to build something with others. 5. I'm too old for that. There's a moment that hits everyone eventually. You hear about someone starting something new, launching a business, writing a book, learning an instrument, moving to a new city, and your first thought isn't admiration. It's resistance. You say to yourself, "Good for them, but it's too late for me." Maybe you don't say it out loud. Maybe it just floats quietly in the background, a whisper that feels rational. I'm too old for that now. And it seems like wisdom, like maturity, like acceptance. But really, it's resignation wrapped in logic. It's fear pretending to be self-awareness. This idea that there's an expiration date on learning, on changing, on chasing something meaningful, is one of the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves. It's not usually loud, it's quiet, subtle. It hides behind jokes like, "That ship's sailed," or "I'm past my prime." But underneath those lines is a belief that your best years are already behind you, that growth has a deadline. And once you believe that, you start shrinking into the version of yourself that feels safe, predictable, static. But here's the truth. Your body ages, yes, but your mind doesn't run on the same clock. Your ability to evolve, to create, to stretch into something new, that never leaves you. It only gets quieter when you stop feeding it. The Stoics never measured value by youth or speed. They measured it by wisdom, by action, by how much you aligned your choices with your principles. Seneca said, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." That wasn't a metaphor. That was instruction, a mindset. The idea that your life remains a work in progress, not something you finished building at 30 or 40 or even 70. As long as you're breathing, you're still shaping the legacy of who you are. Now, let's be clear, saying, "I'm too old for that," doesn't always sound like defeat. Sometimes it sounds reasonable. You tell yourself, "I've missed the window," or "People my age don't do that kind of thing." But what you're really doing is protecting yourself from risk. You're avoiding the possibility of failure, of discomfort, of starting as a beginner again. And while that's understandable, it's also limiting. It's like locking yourself in a room just because the hallway looks unfamiliar. We all crave certainty, familiar routines, predictable outcomes. And the older we get, the more tempting it becomes to stick to what we know. But familiarity is not the same as fulfillment. Routine is not the same as purpose. There are people decades younger than you who already feel stuck, already feel finished, because the issue has never been age. It's always been mindset. I once heard a story about a man named Harry Bernstein. He spent his whole life working regular jobs, raising a family, living quietly. He didn't write his first book until he was 93 years old. He called it The Invisible Wall, and it was a memoir about growing up in a divided English town. He was 96 when it was finally published, and you know what? It was a success. He went on to write 3 more books. He didn't let the number on his birth certificate define the size of his ambition. He didn't fall for the lie that old meant done. He had something to say, and he found the courage to say it even when the world expected him to stay quiet. That's what strong people do. They challenge their own expiration dates. They say, maybe I haven't done this yet, but that doesn't mean I can't start now. They ask better questions, not, am I too old? But what would my life look like if I still said yes to possibility? And it doesn't have to be something massive. Maybe there's a hobby you used to love that you haven't touched in years, a language you wanted to learn, a skill you set aside, a dream you packed away quietly because life got busy, and then you just told yourself it was too late. It's not. The door might look smaller now, but it's not closed. You just have to walk through it on purpose. Psychologically, this idea of being too old is tied to what's called self-limiting beliefs. It's when your brain decides to protect you from discomfort by convincing you not to try. You tell yourself you're too old, not because it's true, but because it spares you the fear of starting from scratch. But that belief builds walls around your potential. And over time, those walls become your identity. The good news? They're imaginary, and you can tear them down with one new action. Here's the paradox. The people who say, I'm too old, are often the ones who've lived enough to be great at whatever they want to pursue. They've got the patience, the insight, the resilience, the experience, everything they need, except the belief that it still matters, that they still matter. And if you're hearing this and thinking, yeah, but I've tried before and it didn't work, remember this. Failing when you're younger doesn't mean you'll fail again. In fact, you might be more equipped now, wiser, more grounded, less distracted by ego. The Stoics weren't focused on age, they were focused on virtue, on becoming someone of character, of substance. That has nothing to do with how many years you've lived. It has everything to do with what you do with today. The moments you still have, the opportunities still within reach. So here's a question worth sitting with. What would your life look like if you stopped assuming it's too late? What if instead of saying, I'm too old, you said, why not now? You don't need to run a marathon tomorrow. You just need to take the next step. Send the email, sign up for the class, pick up the pen, start the conversation, something small, something real. Because every excuse disguised as wisdom will eventually rob you of time. It will shrink your world, even if it sounds reasonable. But courage, especially quiet, steady courage, that expands your world, that makes space for joy, for discovery, for a kind of fulfillment that only comes from doing the thing you once told yourself you couldn't. 6. I'll do it later. We've all said it. That one phrase that feels like a safety net, like you're being responsible, like you're just waiting for the right moment to show up. I'll do it later. On the surface, it sounds harmless, like a temporary pause, a promise to yourself that you'll circle back around. But let's be honest. How often does later actually come? Not the idealized, productive version of later, the real one. The one where you're tired, distracted, pulled in 10 different directions. The one where something else feels more urgent, more comfortable, more familiar. That version of later is where most dreams quietly die. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. They weren't obsessed with time in the way we are today, with calendars and apps and productivity hacks. They were obsessed with life, with presence, with the deep truth that you don't own the next hour, let alone tomorrow. Marcus Aurelius used to remind himself, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not to scare himself, but to focus, to avoid the trap of delay. Because every moment you postpone what matters, you're gambling with something you can't get back. The real danger of "I'll do it later" isn't that you'll never get around to it. It's that you'll start believing you have unlimited time, that you'll always have the chance to say what needs to be said, to start what you've been avoiding, to fix what's been breaking slowly. You start living like life owes you more time. But it doesn't. Time is indifferent. It keeps moving whether you use it well or not. There's a strange comfort in procrastination. It feels like control, like you're choosing your timing, but most of the time it's not control, it's fear. Fear of failure, fear of discomfort, fear of not being ready. So we tell ourselves we'll do it later, when we feel more confident, more prepared, more sure. But here's the paradox. The only way to become confident is to start without it. The only way to get ready is to move before you feel ready. That's where real growth happens, not in planning, but in motion. Seneca once wrote, "While we wait for life, life passes." It's a sobering thought, because we all have those things, calls we haven't made, decisions we've delayed, projects we've let gather dust. And at first, it feels like they're just sitting there, waiting patiently. But they're not. They're slowly becoming heavier, more complicated, more distant. What could have taken 10 minutes yesterday now feels like a mountain today. That's the cost of delay. Momentum fades. And once momentum dies, inertia takes over. You start to normalize inaction. Let's take something simple, like sending an important message. You think about it today, decide it's not the right moment, and tell yourself you'll do it tomorrow. But tomorrow brings new distractions, and the day after that, you forget. A week passes, then 2, and suddenly, the message that could have been sent in under a minute becomes something you now feel awkward about. The opportunity has shifted, the moment passed, and all you're left with is a quiet feeling that you missed something small but meaningful. And this applies to much bigger things too. Maybe you've been putting off working on your health, starting that side project, repairing a strained relationship, or setting boundaries that protect your peace. Each time you push it to later, it doesn't just stay frozen. It drifts. It fades. Eventually it moves far enough away that you stop seeing it as possible. That's how people end up living lives they never meant to settle for. Not because they made one huge mistake, but because they made 1,000 tiny delays. But here's the truth. The only thing standing between you and the life you want isn't time. It's permission. The permission you keep postponing. The permission to begin, even when the circumstances aren't perfect. The Stoics didn't believe in waiting for ideal conditions. They believed in acting with what you had now. Marcus Aurelius said, "Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." And sometimes the right thing is just taking the first step, even if it's messy, even if it's small. Psychologists talk about something called the intention-action gap. It's the space between knowing what you need to do and actually doing it. And that gap is often filled with excuses that sound rational. I'm too tired. It's not the right time. I need to do more research first. But the real reason is usually emotional. It's resistance. And resistance doesn't care about your logic. It only dissolves when you act. So how do you break it? You lower the bar. You stop trying to do the whole thing and instead ask, what can I do in 5 minutes? Can I outline the first paragraph? Can I write one sentence? Can I make the call and leave a voicemail? Can I set a timer and clean one drawer? That's how you win. Not by overhauling everything, but by starting something you can't talk yourself out of. Carl Jung also said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That includes habits like procrastination. If you don't examine the patterns behind your delays, you'll keep thinking life just happens this way. But it doesn't. Life happens how you choose to engage with it. Every moment you decide to move, even slightly, you rewrite the story. And no, this isn't about being constantly productive. It's not about hustle or perfectionism. It's about presence, about showing up for what matters, because the things you delay often are the things that matter most. That's why they feel so uncomfortable. They carry weight, emotional weight, but ignoring that weight doesn't make it go away. It just makes you feel more burdened over time. There's a reason so many Stoic practices involve reflection. They'd start or end their day by asking, what did I do? What did I avoid? What can I face better tomorrow? It wasn't about guilt, it was about course correction. A daily reminder not to let the important things slip through the cracks. And they didn't wait to feel inspired. They acted on principle. So let this be your moment to stop waiting, to stop saying later like it's a promise, and start treating it like a decision. Because you don't need to finish everything today, but you do need to start something. And when you do, something amazing happens. You prove to yourself that motion is possible, that discipline is still there, that you're not at the mercy of distraction or fear or fatigue. You're capable of showing up. Here's a challenge worth accepting. Pick one thing you've been delaying, one conversation, one task, one habit, and take a step toward it today, not later, not tomorrow, within the next hour, even if it's just 5 minutes. Even if it's just writing a sentence, making a list, sending a text. Because once you move, you build momentum. And momentum turns later into now. 7. That's just how I am. There's a phrase that slips out of people's mouths far too easily, and it often comes with a shrug, a sigh, or a tone that says, "I've made peace with this." It usually shows up when someone's being called out for a habit, a pattern, a behavior they've repeated too many times. And it sounds deceptively wise. They say, "That's just how I am." But what sounds like self-awareness is often just resistance, not a reflection of deep insight, but of quietly giving up. It's a verbal shield meant to protect us from one of the most uncomfortable truths of all, that we are still a work in progress, and we always will be. When you say, "That's just how I am," what you're really doing is slamming the door shut on growth. You're telling yourself and everyone else that change isn't possible, not because it truly isn't, but because you've decided it's easier not to try. It's a defense mechanism disguised as honesty. And if you're not careful, you start to believe your own story. You start to wear your limitations like a badge of identity. The person who loses their temper says, "I've always had a short fuse." The one who avoids intimacy says, "I just don't do feelings." The one who keeps procrastinating says, "I've never been disciplined." But here's the truth. Just because something has been true about you doesn't mean it has to stay true. The Stoics didn't believe people were fixed in place. They believed in training the mind, in shaping character over time. Epictetus, born a slave and later revered as a philosopher, taught that we are not disturbed by events, but by our judgments about them. That principle applies to how we see ourselves. If you believe that you are incapable of change, then you won't change. Not because it's impossible, but because you never gave yourself the chance. And that belief, that your personality is set in stone, is one of the most quietly destructive ideas a person can carry. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That's a bold statement. It invites you to take ownership, not just of your actions, but of your identity. And that's where this phrase, "That's just how I am," becomes so dangerous. It keeps you anchored to your past. It makes the past the lens through which you view your future. But the past isn't a blueprint, it's a reference point. It's there to show you where you've been, not where you have to stay. There's a false comfort in accepting a version of yourself that no longer fits. It removes the pressure to do the hard work of evolving. And make no mistake, growth is hard. It requires reflection, discomfort, vulnerability. It means admitting that maybe the way you've always done things isn't working anymore. That takes courage. The Stoics called this courage fortitude, a strength that isn't loud or showy, but steady, persistent, willing to face the truth, even when it's painful. When someone says, "That's just how I am," they often believe they're protecting themselves from judgment, but what they're really doing is hiding. Hiding from the work, hiding from responsibility, hiding from the possibility of becoming someone better. Because becoming better means being honest about where you're falling short. It means admitting that your comfort zone is also your cage. Let's look at this from a psychological angle. There's a concept called fixed mindset versus growth mindset. A fixed mindset believes abilities, traits, and intelligence are static. A growth mindset believes they can be developed. Guess which one leads to resilience, success, deeper relationships, and a more fulfilling life? Every study points in the same direction. The people who grow are the people who believe they can. Belief precedes transformation. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That doesn't mean life has no value if you don't reflect. It means you won't realize that value. You won't extract the wisdom, the insight, the transformation that comes from examining how you operate, why you do what you do, who you've been, and who you might still become. You are not your patterns. You are not your mistakes. You are not your childhood. You are not your trauma. Those things shaped you, yes, but they don't have to define you. Every day, you wake up with the ability to act differently, to speak more kindly, to listen more fully, to build a new habit, to challenge an old one, to reshape the path you're on. But none of that happens if you hold on tightly to the idea that this is just who I am. It's ironic, isn't it? People fight so hard to defend their identity, even when that identity is holding them back. We cling to our flaws like they're part of our DNA. But the truth is, most of the things we consider just who I am are choices we've made so often, they feel automatic. They feel permanent, but they're not. They're patterns, and patterns can be broken. And no, change isn't instant. It's not about waking up one day and becoming an entirely new person. It's about making small, consistent decisions that align with the person you want to be. The Stoics would remind themselves daily of who they were becoming. They didn't assume they had arrived. They kept the bar high, not in a perfectionist way, but in a purposeful way. They knew that character isn't something you have, it's something you build. Imagine how different your life would look if, instead of saying, "That's just how I am," you asked, "Who do I want to become?" That question shifts everything. It turns your focus forward. It invites possibility. It tells your brain, "We're not done here." And that's the kind of mindset that changes not just your behavior, but your trajectory. The people who live with purpose, the ones who grow, who evolve, who live lives they're proud of, are rarely the ones who got everything right from the start. They're the ones who didn't let a version of themselves become a prison. They questioned their habits. They listened to feedback. They adjusted. They apologized. They tried again. And over time they became someone new, not by abandoning who they were, but by refining it. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "That's just how I am," stop. Take a breath. Ask yourself if that version of you still serves the life you're trying to build. Maybe it did once. Maybe it protected you, helped you survive, gave you an identity when you needed one. But now it might be holding you back, and you owe it to yourself to let that version evolve, because you are not finished. You are not fixed. You are not a closed book. You are a becoming. Every day you are either reinforcing who you were or investing in who you could be. And the choice is yours. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now. 8. They're just lucky. It's a strange thing, isn't it? How quick we are to explain away someone else's success with just one word: luck. You see someone doing well. Maybe they started a business, landed a great job, built a strong relationship, or got in amazing shape. And instead of asking how they did it, the reflex is to say, they're just lucky. And that phrase might sound harmless, like an offhand comment, but if you look closer, it's doing something much deeper. It's protecting you from something you don't want to face, from the possibility that they earned it and that you're capable of doing the same, but haven't. When we call someone lucky, we create distance between their results and our effort. We turn their success into a fluke, not a formula, and in doing so, we rob ourselves of the lesson. Because here's the truth: luck exists, yes. Some people are born into better circumstances, some catch breaks, but that's not the whole story. More often than not, what looks like luck from the outside is the result of unseen hours, relentless discipline, repeated failure, and quiet persistence. Stoic philosophy doesn't deny fortune, it simply refuses to be ruled by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's the mindset we need to cultivate. When we see someone succeeding, the strong thing, the stoic thing, is not to envy or dismiss them, but to get curious, to ask, what decisions did they make that I'm not making? What habits do they have that I'm avoiding? That's how intelligent people think. They don't minimize other people's victories, they study them. Envy, on the other hand, is like a poison you willingly drink. It doesn't harm the person you're jealous of. It just eats away at your focus, your clarity, your energy. There's something deeply empowering about taking responsibility for your reaction. You stop seeing others as lucky and start seeing them as evidence that something is possible, that someone, just like you, took the same 24 hours you have and shaped them into something extraordinary. That's not a threat. That's a blueprint. Weak minds look for excuses. They say, yeah, but they had connections, or they were at the right place at the right time, or they don't have kids like I do. But strong minds ask better questions. They don't waste time finding reasons why it wouldn't work for them. They look for one reason why it could, and they start there. Stoicism teaches us to keep our eyes on what we can control, to not be distracted by the noise. When you call someone lucky, what you're really doing is focusing on what they had rather than what they did with it. But here's the thing, every advantage has a limit. Talent burns out, opportunities fade, resources get wasted. What lasts is the inner discipline to use what you've been given with wisdom and effort. And if you really look closely at the people you admire, you'll find something surprising. Most of them didn't feel lucky at all. They felt scared, tired, overwhelmed, just like you. But they kept showing up. They kept pushing forward. And that's what made the difference. That's what the Stoics would call excellence in action. Not perfection, not winning every time, but the willingness to keep moving toward virtue, regardless of the outcome. Seneca wrote, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." That's worth repeating, because preparation is on you. You can't control when the door opens, but you can be ready when it does. And the moment you stop telling yourself that others had it easier, you start freeing up your energy to get better, to improve your skills, to sharpen your focus, to build your version of success, brick by brick. But none of that happens if you stay stuck in the mindset of envy. Envy keeps you in the stands, watching. Admiration puts you on the field. It says, I see what you've done, and I'm going to learn from it. That shift from envy to admiration is powerful. It turns other people's wins into fuel, not friction. There's also a deep psychological truth underneath all of this. When you downplay someone else's achievements, you're usually protecting your ego. You're trying to avoid the discomfort of comparison. But real growth requires that you look comparison in the eye and then turn it inward. Not to punish yourself, but to challenge yourself. To ask, what do I actually want and what am I doing about it? Because the problem isn't that they're lucky. The problem is that you've been avoiding your own potential by focusing on theirs. Carl Jung also said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." That line hits hard here, because when we're obsessed with what others have, we stay asleep to what we could become. We fall into distraction, into resentment, into false stories about what's possible. But the second you turn inward, really inward, you realize the only thing standing between you and the next level of your life is consistent, directed effort. It's also worth remembering that you don't know what someone had to go through to get where they are. Social media makes it easy to assume, to see someone's highlight reel and believe they had it easy. But the Stoics warned us not to trust appearances. They reminded us that suffering, struggle, and sacrifice are often hidden. So instead of assuming luck, assume complexity, assume humanity. That mindset breeds compassion and wisdom. And that wisdom will serve you, because the more time you spend comparing, the less time you spend creating. The more time you spend resenting, the less time you spend building. Envy makes you passive. Admiration makes you active. And action, even small action, is the antidote to every feeling of inadequacy you've ever had. So the next time you hear yourself saying, "They're just lucky," pause. Interrupt that thought. Ask yourself what they might have done to earn it. Ask what you can learn. Ask how you can apply even one piece of what they've modeled. That's how strong people think. That's how wise people move. Because in the end, success leaves clues. It doesn't have to be mysterious. It doesn't have to belong to other people. It can belong to you too. But only if you're willing to study, to try, to stumble, and to rise again. The Stoic path is not about bitterness. It's about self-mastery. It's about looking at the world honestly, not defensively. It's about trading envy for effort, complaints for clarity, excuses for action. That's the mindset that builds peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything going right, but the kind that comes from knowing you've shown up fully for your own life. 9. It's not fair. You don't have to look far to find something that feels unfair. Someone gets a job they didn't earn. Someone gets credit for your work. A person who cuts corners gets ahead while you're playing by the rules. Or maybe you've gone through something harder than anyone around you even knows, and no one sees it. And the question rises up in your chest like fire. Why me? Why is this happening? Why do things go wrong for people who are trying to do right? It's a natural question, a human one, but if you're not careful, it becomes a trap, a mental loop, a story you start to live in. And that story sounds like this. It's not fair. Over and over again. Sometimes out loud, sometimes just echoing in the background of your thoughts. At first, it feels like honesty, like self-protection, but in reality, it's a slow surrender, because the moment you get stuck in fairness, you stop looking at what you can actually do. You trade your power for pity, your energy for resentment, and your direction for a dead end. You will face injustice. You will be wronged. You will be overlooked, underestimated, misunderstood. That's life. And no amount of shouting, "It's not fair," into the wind will change that. But what will change things? Taking ownership of your response. Choosing to act with clarity instead of collapsing into bitterness. Fairness implies that there's some giant scoreboard in the sky, tracking every win and loss, every setback and success, making sure it all balances out in the end. But that's not how reality works. Good people go through hard things. Bad people sometimes get rewarded. Timing is unpredictable, resources are uneven, and life doesn't offer explanations when it hands out pain. But the Stoics didn't see this as a reason to quit. They saw it as the arena where character is forged. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a person perfected without trials." That means you don't become strong in ideal conditions. You become strong when you face resistance. When things don't go your way, when the outcome doesn't match your effort. That's the moment where you decide, do I spiral into why me, or do I shift to what now? The victim mindset is seductive because it offers a story that makes you feel right. You can explain your pain, justify your inaction, gather evidence for why you're stuck. But that story, if you cling to it long enough, will make you smaller. You start seeing the world through a lens of powerlessness, and even when things do go well, you'll still feel unsafe, still waiting for the next unfair blow to land. The Stoics believed that virtue wasn't about outcomes, it was about intention. You don't act with integrity because the world will reward you. You act with integrity even if it doesn't. That's what makes it virtue. It's not transactional, it's foundational. Think of someone you respect deeply, not because they're rich or famous, but because of how they carry themselves. Chances are that person has faced adversity. They've been treated unfairly, and yet they didn't fold. They didn't get bitter. They didn't let the pain of injustice corrupt their behavior. That's not weakness. That's discipline. That's strength of the highest order. Psychologically, staying stuck in "it's not fair" traps you in what's known as an external locus of control. You believe that your life is dictated by forces outside of you, luck, other people, institutions, fate. But people with an internal locus of control believe their choices matter, even when life's unfair, especially when life's unfair. And study after study shows that people who adopt this mindset are not only more successful, they're more emotionally stable, more resilient, more fulfilled. Because here's what happens when you shift your focus away from fairness and toward action. You get momentum. Even small steps start to rebuild your confidence. You stop comparing your situation to someone else's and start asking, what's possible for me right now with what I have? That question alone is powerful. It shifts you out of complaint and into creativity. Stoicism doesn't teach you to ignore pain. It teaches you to face it with clarity, to feel it, honor it, and then move through it with purpose. That doesn't mean you don't acknowledge injustice, but it means you don't let it define you. You use it. You let it deepen your empathy, sharpen your discipline, strengthen your resolve. And if there's one habit worth building, it's this. When things feel unfair, pause and ask, what now? That simple shift reframes everything. It pulls you out of reactivity and into choice. You may not have chosen what happened, but you always get to choose what happens next. So when life punches you in the gut, and it will, don't waste time hoping for fairness. Hope is not a strategy. Strategy is a strategy. Resilience is a strategy. Wisdom is a strategy. And those things live in your response, not your circumstances. Here's the challenge. For the next week, every time you feel wronged, overlooked, disrespected, or discouraged, don't say, "It's not fair." Say, "This is my training." Treat the moment like a gym for your mind, a test of your philosophy. Because the stronger you get at facing unfairness with composure, the less control it has over you, the less it defines you. 10. I hate people. Sometimes life gets messy. People disappoint you, talk behind your back, ghost you, betray your trust, or just drain your energy with their chaos. And somewhere along the way, maybe quietly at first, maybe in a moment of rage, you say it. I hate people. It feels like a release, a defense, a protective wall. But if we're honest, what that phrase really does is isolate us. It doesn't make us stronger. It cuts us off. From connection, from compassion, and from one of the most essential parts of being human, understanding others. The Stoics didn't believe in isolating themselves from society, quite the opposite. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor who had every reason to give up on people, wrote constantly about patience, empathy, and the shared condition of humanity. He began his meditations by listing the traits he admired in the people who raised him, like humility, strength, and restraint. That's not the diary of someone who hates people. That's someone who understood how to navigate a complicated world without letting it poison his spirit. Saying, "I hate people," might feel honest in the moment, but most of the time, it's a mask. It's pain dressed up as power. You got burned one too many times, or maybe you've just been surrounded by the wrong people for too long. But here's what that phrase really does. It shuts down your ability to connect. It turns a temporary wound into a permanent worldview. And over time, it makes you bitter, cold, distant. Even when the right people finally show up, you won't let them in, because you've already made up your mind. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That's hard to swallow, but it's true. The things that get under your skin about people usually reflect something inside you, an unmet need, an unresolved wound, a value that's been violated. And until you understand that, you'll keep blaming people instead of getting curious about your own patterns. It's easy to generalize, to throw up our hands and say, people are the worst. But the truth is, people are not one thing. They're not a monolith. They're individuals, each with their own story, their own baggage, their own blind spots, just like you. And when you write everyone off, you don't just avoid pain, you also miss out on healing, on growth, on those rare moments of genuine connection that remind you you're not alone. The Stoics taught us not to be surprised by human behavior. Marcus Aurelius would start his day by reminding himself that he was going to encounter selfishness, ignorance, rudeness, and greed. Not to become cynical, but to stay grounded. "When you wake up in the morning," he wrote, "tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." Why? Because that's life. Because expecting people to always act wisely or kindly is setting yourself up for disappointment. But expecting imperfection, that gives you freedom. It lets you respond with patience instead of rage, curiosity instead of contempt. And this isn't about tolerating abuse or enabling toxicity. You're allowed to walk away from people who drain you, lie to you, or disrespect your boundaries. The Stoics believed in protecting your peace, but they also believed in facing the world as it is, not as we wish it would be. Saying, "I hate people," is a way of avoiding the complexity of real relationships. It keeps things black and white, but people aren't that simple, and neither are you. Psychologically, when we disconnect from others, it affects our mental health. Studies have shown that social isolation increases stress, anxiety, and depression. And while it might feel empowering to say you don't need anyone, the reality is we're wired for connection. That doesn't mean you have to be best friends with everyone, but it does mean that compassion, empathy, and understanding are muscles worth exercising. Let's be real. People are hard. They come with egos and insecurities and wounds they haven't healed from. But so do you. And the more grace you can extend to others, the more likely you are to extend it to yourself. Because when you start labeling the entire world as unworthy of your trust or your kindness, eventually that reflection turns inward. You begin to question your own value too. There's a reason the Stoics practiced sympatheia, the idea that we are all part of a greater whole. We're not isolated atoms bumping into each other. We're connected, interdependent. What happens to one of us affects the rest. So what can you do instead of saying, "I hate people"? You start small. You give someone the benefit of the doubt. You pause before reacting. You ask yourself, what might be going on behind the scenes that I don't see? Not to excuse bad behavior, but to choose wisdom over assumption. And maybe you start with just one person, one conversation where you listen more than you speak, one moment where you withhold judgment and lean into compassion. Over time, those moments add up. They soften your edges. They make you safer, for others and for yourself. Because what you practice with others, you reinforce in your own mind. The goal isn't to love everyone. That's unrealistic. The goal is to not let your worst experiences with people turn you into someone you're not proud of. The Stoics weren't naive. They didn't expect the world to be gentle, but they also didn't let that harden them into bitterness. They practiced virtue, justice, courage, wisdom, and temperance in a world that gave them every reason not to. That's what made their philosophy powerful, not because it was idealistic, but because it was resilient. So here's a challenge. This week, when you feel the urge to roll your eyes, to snap, to say, "People are the worst," pause. Ask yourself, what am I really reacting to? Is it that person, or is it something in me that needs attention? Something in me that wants to be seen, heard, respected? The strongest people aren't the ones who cut everyone off. They're the ones who learn how to navigate the messiness of human interaction without losing themselves, who stay soft without being weak, who stay open without being naive, who stay kind even when it's easier to be cold. Because when you hate people, you shut the door on connection. But when you understand people even just a little, you open a door back to yourself. You remember that you're part of this strange, imperfect, beautiful mess, and that there's wisdom not in running from it, but in learning how to live inside it with grace. 11th. That's not my job. You've probably heard it before, maybe even said it yourself. You're in a situation where something clearly needs to be done. Someone drops the ball. A task is left unfinished. A small crisis starts to build. And someone shrugs and says, "That's not my job." It sounds reasonable, like a boundary, like someone protecting their time, their energy, their role. But here's the thing. Most of the time, that phrase doesn't come from strength. It comes from avoidance. It's not a shield, it's a ceiling. And if you say it enough times, you start to limit your own growth without even realizing it. We live in a culture that constantly preaches, do the minimum, protect your time. Don't let anyone take advantage of you. And while there's wisdom in not burning yourself out, there's also a danger in mistaking avoidance for self-respect. Because people who consistently go above and beyond aren't pushovers. They're not weak. They're not naive. They're leaders. Even if they don't wear the title, even if no one claps for them. Strong minds step up, not to get attention, but because they can. The Stoics would never have told you to only do what's required. Marcus Aurelius believed that we are made for each other, for service, for contribution, for action rooted in virtue. He said, if something is humanly possible, consider it to be within your reach. That's not about overloading yourself. It's about owning your capacity. If you see a problem and you know how to fix it, fix it. If someone's struggling and you can offer support, offer it. Not because it's in your job description, but because it's in your character. Saying, "That's not my job," cuts you off from opportunity, from trust, from growth. Because the truth is, people remember those who step up, not the ones who stick to the script, not the ones who keep their heads down, but the ones who show initiative, who take ownership, who solve problems no one else is even looking at. Those people stand out, not by doing everything, but by doing what needs to be done when it counts. Here's what people often miss. Stepping in doesn't mean becoming everyone's doormat. It means being someone who moves with intention, someone who acts from a place of purpose. Stoicism is not about saying yes to everything, it's about aligning your actions with your values. Seneca wrote, "No man was ever wise by chance. Wisdom takes effort. It takes discipline. And discipline often looks like doing the hard thing before being asked." There's also a deeper psychological layer here. When someone constantly says, "That's not my job," what they're really doing is protecting their ego. They don't want to fail. They don't want to be held accountable for something outside their lane. But here's the paradox. Leaders aren't the people who avoid responsibility. They're the ones who invite it, not recklessly, not for praise, but because they know that responsibility is the road to growth. And this mindset, this way of showing up, it creates something powerful. It builds reputation. People start to trust you. They know you'll take ownership, you'll speak up, you'll act. And over time, that builds influence, not through force, not through ego, but through quiet, consistent integrity. Now let's be honest, it's not always easy to step up, especially when it feels like no one else is doing their part. You might think, why should I do more if they're not? But that's a mindset built on resentment, not leadership. It's also worth noting that most of the biggest opportunities in life don't come labeled as opportunities. They come disguised as problems, gaps, inconveniences, things that are not your job. But when you treat those moments as invitations instead of burdens, everything changes. That's how you build leverage. That's how you grow skills you weren't hired for. That's how you become valuable in ways no one expected. There's a story I once heard about a man who worked in a shipping warehouse. His job was simple: scan, lift, move. But he started noticing problems in the system: inventory being misplaced, orders being delayed, miscommunication between teams. So he began keeping notes. Then he started testing small fixes. He built a system on his own time. Eventually, his manager noticed. 6 months later, he was leading operations, not because he had the right credentials, but because he had the right mindset. He could have said, "That's not my job," but instead he asked, "What can I improve?" That question, that one question, shifted his entire career. And you don't need a fancy title to do the same. You just need to stay curious, alert, willing. Carl Jung also said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and becoming who you are doesn't happen by sticking to the bare minimum. It happens when you challenge yourself, when you lean into discomfort, when you stop waiting for permission and start asking, what does this moment require of me?" And here's the twist. Most of the time, when you do more than expected, you get more than expected. You build internal pride, external credibility. You become someone people trust, admire, and rely on. That's not about people-pleasing. It's about self-respect. Because deep down, you know when you've shown up fully and when you've held back. Now, this doesn't mean saying yes to everything. It doesn't mean burning yourself out to prove your worth. The Stoics were clear about the importance of balance. They believed in duty, not desperation. You don't serve others to win approval. You serve to live in alignment with your best self, to embody strength, purpose, leadership. So the next time you hear that little voice say, "That's not my job," pause. Ask yourself, is this beneath me, or is it simply beyond what I've done before? Because there's a difference, and sometimes what feels like extra is actually the next step in your evolution. Here's your challenge. This week, look for one thing that needs doing, something small, maybe even invisible to others, and do it. Not because it's required, but because it's who you are becoming. That's how you lead. That's how you grow. That's how you build a life defined not by boundaries, but by boldness. Not by avoidance, but by initiative. In the end, it's not about job titles. It's not about what's written in your contract. It's about how you carry yourself, what you're willing to own, and who you choose to be when no one's watching. Because those moments, the ones that aren't your job, they're often the ones that reveal the most about who you really are. And if you choose to act with excellence, not because you have to, but because you can, you'll start to feel something deeper, something grounded, something unshakable. That's not just leadership, that's character. And character, as the Stoics knew, is the only job that really matters. 12th. No offense, but there's a phrase we've all heard, maybe even used, that pretends to be innocent, but almost always carries a sharp edge. It starts like this: no offense, but, and what usually follows isn't thoughtful or helpful. It's criticism in disguise, a backhanded opinion, a subtle jab. And what makes it worse? The speaker thinks they've protected themselves from responsibility, as if saying no offense magically erases the sting of what comes next. But let's be honest, if you feel the need to say no offense, you already know the words you're about to speak have the potential to hurt. And using that phrase doesn't make it harmless. It just reveals that you're trying to dodge the emotional consequence of your own delivery. In Stoic philosophy, speech is seen as something sacred. The words we use aren't just sounds, they're actions. They reflect character, they shape relationships, they can build trust or break it. Marcus Aurelius believed that every action should serve a greater good. That includes how we speak, and there's nothing virtuous about dressing cruelty in the clothes of casual honesty. It doesn't make you wiser, it doesn't make you brave, it just makes you careless with something that has power, your voice. When we throw out opinions without care for how they land, what we're really doing is avoiding our own shadows. We act like we're just being real, when the truth is, we're avoiding vulnerability. We want to be heard, but not held accountable. Let's break this down. People who say no offense, but often think they're just being honest. They believe honesty is a virtue, and it is. But honesty without responsibility is not a virtue, it's a weapon. And the Stoics made a clear distinction between speaking truth and speaking with wisdom. If your goal is to express a truth, do it directly, respectfully, without pretense. Strong minds don't hide behind disclaimers. They speak with clarity and take full ownership of the impact. Because here's the thing, kindness doesn't water down honesty. Kindness strengthens it. It gives it direction. It turns it into something useful instead of destructive. We live in a world that confuses bluntness with strength. People admire those who tell it like it is. But real courage is not in saying whatever pops into your head. Real courage is in saying the truth in a way that others can hear it. That's what separates the wise from the reckless. It's easy to be loud. It's much harder to be clear and compassionate at the same time. Psychologists often refer to this as emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize your own emotions, manage them, and navigate social situations with awareness and care. When someone uses the phrase, no offense, what they're really doing is signaling a lack of that awareness. They know there's a sting in their words, but they're unwilling to take ownership for it. So they preface it with a shield, hoping to be immune from reaction. But language doesn't work like that. People don't forget the sting just because you said they shouldn't feel it. Think about the last time someone used that phrase on you. No offense, but... And then came the judgment. Did you feel respected, or did you feel dismissed? That's the impact. And intention isn't enough. You might intend to be helpful, but if the result is harm, then your delivery needs work. That's not weakness, that's maturity. The Stoics talked a lot about temperance, one of the 4 core virtues. It's the ability to practice self-restraint, not in a way that suppresses truth, but in a way that gives it precision. A sword in a skilled hand is effective. In a clumsy hand, it's dangerous. Words are no different. And strong people, wise people, understand this. They don't just speak, they consider. They weigh their words before releasing them. They ask, is this necessary? Is this helpful? Is this the right time? Not because they're afraid of conflict, but because they respect the value of communication. Let's be clear. Speaking with kindness doesn't mean you never offer criticism. It means you offer it in a way that can be received. There's nothing brave about dropping a verbal grenade and walking away. That's not strength. That's cowardice dressed in bluntness. True accountability means you own your tone. You stay present for the reaction. You listen. You adjust. You build, not break. The people who make the biggest impact in this world aren't the ones who bulldoze their opinions through conversations. They're the ones who earn trust with how they speak. They choose words that land with weight, not just volume. They leave people feeling seen, not judged. That's what earns influence. That's what creates lasting relationships. Personal, professional, everything in between. So here's a challenge. The next time you feel the urge to say, no offense, stop. Ask yourself why you feel the need to say that. Are you about to be unnecessarily harsh? Are you bracing for conflict you're about to create? If so, reframe. Replace it with clarity. Say what you mean, but say it in a way that builds bridges, not walls. And if you're on the receiving end of a no-offense moment, remember what the Stoics taught. You can't control what others say. You can only control your reaction. Don't internalize careless words. Don't take ownership of someone else's lack of self-awareness. Instead, stay grounded, respond with poise, and decide if the feedback is useful or just noise. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." If someone throws careless words your way, rise above. Don't meet disrespect with more disrespect. Respond with discipline, with grace, with strength. Here's another powerful move. Practice replacing casual disclaimers with intentional language. Instead of saying, "No offense, but you're always late," try, "I've noticed you've been running late, and I wanted to check in. Everything okay?" Same message, completely different tone. One builds connection, the other breaks it. That's the difference between reacting and responding, between ego and empathy, between noise and wisdom. So much of the chaos in the world isn't caused by what's said, but by how it's said. And if you want to live a life of depth, of meaning, of impact, your words matter. They're not throwaways. They're tools. Use them with care. In the end, speech is a choice, one you make dozens of times every day. Choose to speak with purpose, with awareness, with strength that includes softness. Because when you do, you not only become someone worth listening to, you become someone worth trusting. And that trust? That's what opens doors. That's what sustains relationships. That's what builds a legacy of character in a world full of noise. So speak clearly, speak kindly, speak like someone who isn't afraid of being heard or held accountable. That's what intelligent people do. That's what wise people do. And that's what strong, disciplined minds have done since the days of the Stoics. 13. It's always been done this way. There's a certain comfort in doing things the way they've always been done, a quiet ease in following the same steps, using the same tools, walking the same mental path that's already been carved out for you. It feels familiar, safe, efficient even, and over time, that routine becomes something more than just a method. It becomes a belief, an unspoken rule, a habit dressed up as wisdom. And when someone dares to ask why, the answer is simple, almost sacred, because this is how it's always been done. But here's the truth. That phrase, that mindset, isn't rooted in clarity. It's rooted in fear, fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of being wrong. When we cling too tightly to tradition without questioning its purpose, we stop evolving, we stop thinking, we start outsourcing our judgment to old patterns instead of examining what truly works. And that's not strength, that's stagnation. Just because something is difficult or unfamiliar doesn't mean it's wrong. Often that discomfort is the very thing pointing toward growth. But if you're locked into the belief that tradition is untouchable, you'll never get close enough to discomfort to grow. There's a massive difference between honoring the past and being owned by it. Traditions can be beautiful. They can carry meaning, values, and lessons. But they can also become cages, especially when we stop questioning their relevance. The Stoics didn't worship tradition. They used reason. They filtered their actions through one key question. Is this aligned with virtue? Not, is this what's always been done? But is this right? That takes courage, it takes thought, and it requires letting go of autopilot. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely," and that includes accepting the parts of us that follow blindly, the parts that cling to routine because we're afraid of the responsibility that comes with making a new choice. Because questioning the old way means you might have to lead, you might have to fail, you might have to break something and rebuild it from scratch. But that's the cost of progress. That's the cost of becoming someone who isn't just repeating history, but reshaping it. Let's bring this down to earth. Think about your own routines, the way you start your mornings, the way you handle stress, the stories you tell yourself about work, love, health, time. How much of that is chosen, deliberate, and how much of it is inherited? From your family, from your culture, from your past self. How often do you ask, is this still serving me? That one question can flip everything. It creates space for clarity, because not all routines are bad. Some serve you deeply. They provide structure, rhythm, a foundation, but the ones that don't, the ones that drain you, dull you, shrink you, they become dead weight. And the longer you carry them, the more they define you. Until one day, you wake up living a life designed by someone you used to be. The Stoics believed in reflection, not once a year, not in crisis, but every day. At the end of each day, they asked themselves, what did I do? Where did I fall short? Where did I succeed? What can I do better tomorrow? That kind of self-inquiry is the antidote to blind tradition. It keeps you awake, intentional, alive. There's something powerful about a mind that's willing to challenge what's always been, not out of rebellion, but out of purpose. That's the kind of mind that creates change, that innovates, that disrupts. And disruption isn't chaos, it's evolution. It's the natural consequence of asking better questions. Too often we confuse comfort with truth. If something feels easy, we assume it must be right. But growth rarely feels easy. It stretches you, challenges you, forces you to confront outdated beliefs. And those beliefs are often dressed in the language of certainty. This is just how it's done. But ask yourself, done by who and for what purpose? Let's be real, it's uncomfortable to question the old way, especially when everyone around you still buys into it. You might feel out of place, rebellious, even disrespectful. But wisdom is not about doing what's expected, it's about doing what's effective. And sometimes, what's effective requires walking away from what's always been. This isn't just about traditions passed down by others. It's also about the ones you've built for yourself, the way you've always handled conflict, the way you've always avoided risks, the way you've always settled for less because you believed you didn't deserve more. Those patterns may feel familiar, but familiarity isn't the same as truth, and you owe it to yourself to ask, does this way still fit the life I want to live? The Stoics didn't believe in staying small. They believed in becoming, in practicing virtue, in moving toward reason, clarity, courage, and justice. And sometimes that means tearing down a system, even if that system is inside your own mind. The beautiful thing is, once you start asking questions, you start unlocking possibility. You realize that just because something's worked before doesn't mean it's the best way forward. You open yourself to new methods, new insights, new outcomes. And with that openness comes freedom, the kind of freedom that only belongs to those brave enough to let go of the past. There's a concept in psychology called functional fixedness. It's the tendency to see things in only one way. A hammer is for nails. A chair is for sitting. But in the hands of a creative mind, a hammer becomes a doorstop. A chair becomes a ladder. When you break free from functional fixedness, you start seeing potential instead of just precedent. That's what happens when you challenge tradition. You stop seeing what something has been and start asking what it could be. So here's a challenge. Pick one area of your life, just one, and examine it. A habit, a belief, a routine. Ask, is this serving me or am I serving it? If it still works, keep it, strengthen it. But if it's outlived its purpose, be willing to let it go, replace it with something better. That's not disrespect, it's growth. In the end, the phrase, "It's always been done this way," is a fork in the road. It invites you to either follow blindly or think bravely, to repeat history or reshape it. And if you want to build a life defined by wisdom, courage, and clarity, then you need to be willing to walk away from what no longer works, even if it once did. Tradition isn't sacred. Truth is, and truth is discovered, not inherited. It's questioned, tested, refined. So live like someone who's willing to challenge what's always been, not for the sake of rebellion, but for the sake of becoming someone who doesn't just exist inside the world, but helps evolve it. 14. I don't care. There's something about the phrase, "I don't care," that makes it feel like a power move, like it places you above the noise, untouchable, unbothered, as if not caring means you've reached some level of control that the rest of the world hasn't figured out. But most of the time, that's not the truth. Most of the time, I don't care isn't strength, it's armor. It's a wall we throw up to protect ourselves from the weight of caring too much. Because caring can be painful, vulnerable, risky. And so we hide behind indifference and call it calm. But Stoic philosophy, which is so often misunderstood as emotionless detachment, never taught that the goal is to not care. In fact, the opposite is true. The Stoics taught that emotional mastery comes from understanding your feelings, not ignoring them. From choosing your response, not pretending you have none. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about crushing his emotions. He wrote about observing them, questioning them, and directing them toward virtue. When we say, "I don't care," what we often mean is, I don't want to feel what this moment is asking me to feel. Maybe it's disappointment, maybe it's embarrassment, maybe it's fear of failure or rejection. But instead of sitting with that discomfort, we shut it down before it even has a chance to surface. And while that might work in the short term, over time it numbs us. We stop feeling much of anything. And when you shut out pain, you shut out meaning too. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that's exactly what happens with this kind of avoidance. When we pretend not to care, we're avoiding a part of ourselves. We're afraid that if we admit we care about the outcome, about the relationship, about how we're perceived, it'll make us weak. But true weakness isn't in caring, it's in being so afraid of feeling that we stop engaging with life. The irony is, the people who say, "I don't care" the most, are often the ones who care the deepest. They just haven't found a healthy way to express it. They've been burned, disappointed, or ignored. So they learn to protect themselves by pretending they feel nothing. But that's not mastery. That's survival mode. And no one thrives in survival mode. You can't build a meaningful life by staying emotionally checked out. Stoicism teaches us to feel fully, but not to be ruled by feelings. That's a key distinction. Emotions aren't the enemy. They're signals, indicators, feedback. If you feel hurt, it means something matters. If you feel fear, it means something is at stake. And if you feel love, it means you're connected to something greater than yourself. None of that should be shut down or shrugged off. It should be understood. Epictetus wrote, "It's not events that disturb people, it's their judgments about them." That includes emotional judgments. When you feel something and label it as weak or wrong, you turn a natural human experience into something shameful. But when you feel something and get curious about it, why is this affecting me so much? What value is being threatened here? You start to build emotional strength, not by suppressing, but by confronting. Let's take a real example. Imagine you worked hard on something, a project, a pitch, a performance, and it gets ignored. No recognition, no praise, just silence. And someone asks, "Are you upset?" You shrug and say, "I don't care." But deep down, maybe you do. Maybe you were hoping someone would notice. Maybe that silence feels like a rejection, but you don't want to deal with that pain, so you shut it down with indifference. Now, instead of processing your disappointment, you carry it like a hidden weight. And the next time you're in a similar situation, you show up already half disengaged, already guarding your heart. And that honesty doesn't make you fragile. It makes you real. It makes your relationships deeper, your work more connected, your life more meaningful. Because when you care, you invest, you commit, you rise. You're willing to take risks, to speak up, to fall down and try again. That's not weakness. That's strength in its purest form. The Stoics believed in eudaimonia, a life of flourishing, meaning, and virtue. That kind of life doesn't come from detachment. It comes from courageous engagement, from stepping into life with your whole self, even when it hurts, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I don't care," pause. Really pause. Ask yourself, is that true? Or are you avoiding something? Are you afraid that caring too much will leave you exposed? And if so, what's the cost of pretending not to care? There's a power that comes with acknowledging what matters to you. It creates direction. It aligns your energy. It makes you dangerous in the best way, because you're no longer hiding behind apathy. You're moving with purpose. Here's something to try. Think of one area in your life where you've been telling yourself, "I don't care." Maybe it's your health, a relationship, a dream you once had. Ask yourself, if I did care, what would I do differently? That question alone can open a door back to the part of you that still hopes, still longs, still wants to fight for something. And no, caring doesn't mean you let your emotions run the show. It means you let them inform your choices, not hijack them. It means you know how to hold what you feel without drowning in it. That's the kind of inner discipline the Stoics talked about. That's the kind of maturity that builds lives with depth. So don't buy into the illusion that detachment is power. Don't numb your way through discomfort. Don't pretend you're above feeling. That's not strength. That's just another mask. And the longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to recognize who you really are underneath. Real strength is saying, "This matters to me," even when no one else sees it, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when it hurts, because that's where meaning lives, that's where character is built, and that's where you'll find the kind of life that's not just efficient, but alive. In the end, "I don't care" might sound like a strategy, but it's often a signal that something inside you is aching for attention. Listen to that. Don't run from it. Don't minimize it. Let it guide you back to what matters, because what you care about is where your power lives, and that power doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be honest. 15. I can't help it. There's a phrase that slips out of people's mouths far too easily, often without thinking, often in frustration, and almost always in resignation. I can't help it. And on the surface it sounds harmless, honest even, like an admission of being human, of having limits. But when you look closer, that sentence does something dangerous. It hands over your power. It says, "This is just how I am. I'm not responsible. I'm not in control." And the more you repeat it, the more you believe it. Not just as a passing comment, but as a story about who you are. The truth is, you can help it. You just haven't learned how yet. You haven't been taught. You haven't practiced. Or maybe deep down, you've convinced yourself that trying would be pointless, that change is out of reach. But that mindset, that quiet surrender, is exactly what the Stoics warned us against. No matter how chaotic life gets, you still have agency. You still have choice. And when you say, "I can't help it," you're choosing to forget that. You're telling yourself that your instincts, your impulses, your emotions are your masters, but they're not. They're just signals. You get to decide what you do with them. We let the unconscious parts of ourselves, our old patterns, our fears, our unchecked emotions, run the show. Then we act surprised by the outcome. But self-awareness, paired with responsibility, breaks that cycle. It puts the steering wheel back in your hands. Let's make this personal. Think about the last time you snapped at someone, procrastinated on something important, or backed out of a challenge because of fear. What did you tell yourself afterward? Was it, "I'm just not good under pressure," or "That's just how I am"? These are softer versions of "I can't help it." They all point to the same conclusion: helplessness. And helplessness kills growth. The Stoics didn't deny that we have natural tendencies. Some people are more anxious, some more impulsive, some more reactive, but they never believed that those tendencies were final. They believed in training the mind, in observing your habits, challenging them, and replacing them with better ones. In fact, the entire Stoic discipline is built around one central idea: self-mastery. Seneca wrote, "Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power." That's not just a motivational quote, it's a blueprint. Power isn't about dominating others, it's about managing yourself, your urges, your reactions, your inner narrative. And that kind of power doesn't show up overnight. It's built through small choices, repeated often, especially when it's uncomfortable. Here's something psychology confirms. Your brain is plastic. Not plastic like fake, but plastic like flexible. It can be reshaped, rewired, repatterned. This concept, known as neuroplasticity, means your brain changes in response to what you repeatedly do and think. So when you say, "I can't help it," you're not stating a fact. You're reinforcing a neural pathway, a habit. But the good news is, those same pathways can be rerouted. You're not stuck, you're just untrained. Let's break it down even further. Every time you face a situation, you bring a pattern to it. Maybe you shut down during conflict. Maybe you lash out when you're criticized. Maybe you avoid what scares you. And if you've done that for years, It feels automatic, like second nature, but automatic isn't the same as inevitable. It's just familiar, and anything familiar can be changed through conscious practice. Carl Jung also said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." Think about that for a moment. How much of your behavior, your reactions, your limitations were modeled for you by someone else? And how much of that have you unconsciously accepted as unchangeable? That's just how I was raised. That's just my personality. No, that's a script, and scripts can be rewritten. That's where intention comes in. When you catch yourself saying, "I can't help it," pause. Replace it with, "I'm working on it." That shift alone is powerful. It doesn't pretend you've already mastered the behavior. It doesn't deny the struggle, but it affirms that you're in the process, that you haven't surrendered. And that's where strength lives, in the effort, not the outcome. Let's say you've always struggled with patience. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you're instantly furious. Instead of saying, "I can't help it, I just have a short fuse," what if you said, "That reaction comes easily to me, but I'm learning to slow it down"? Now you've opened a door, a space between the trigger and your response, and in that space, growth. It's worth saying, this doesn't mean everything is easy to change. Some behaviors are deeply rooted in trauma, conditioning, or neurodivergence. But even in those cases, improvement is possible. Maybe not immediate, maybe not perfect, but real. And it always starts by rejecting the idea that you're helpless. There's a kind of quiet power in admitting, "I haven't figured this out yet." It's humble, it's honest, but it also points forward. Because the moment you say, "I'm working on it," you reclaim the narrative. You remind yourself that effort matters, that progress is real, that control is something you build, not something you're born with. And that mindset, it bleeds into everything. Your work, your relationships, your health. The more you train yourself to respond instead of react, the more you move through life with clarity. You stop being driven by default. You start being driven by design. So here's a challenge. Pick one behavior, just one, that you've been explaining away with, "I can't help it." Maybe it's how you speak when you're angry. Maybe it's how you avoid conflict. Maybe it's how you procrastinate when things get hard. And instead of repeating the old story, start with a new one. "I'm aware of this. I'm working on this. And I'm stronger than I used to be." Because you are stronger than you were, smarter than you think, and far more capable than you give yourself credit for. The Stoics didn't promise perfection. They practiced daily improvement. And that's all you need to do. One better decision, one adjusted reaction, one small step toward mastery. And if you fall back into the old pattern, that's okay. Growth isn't linear, but don't say, "I can't help it." Say, "That wasn't who I want to be. Let me try again." That's how you build a mind that's not ruled by habit, but guided by virtue. In the end, helplessness is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid discomfort. But the truth is, you are not your past. You are not your patterns. You are what you practice. And with every moment, every choice, every breath, you have the chance to practice something better, stronger, wiser. You are not defined by your first reaction. You are defined by what you choose to do next. Growth isn't loud. It's a quiet decision made again and again to be better, wiser, calmer. If something today sparked a change in you, keep that fire alive. Watch the next video on your screen, because your journey doesn't end here. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. Keep showing up. Keep becoming.